Actually, in the struggle in Sudan, I have been in the struggle since 2013, fighting for our rights as a Sudanese, for democracy, for good governance, as a woman. And when I just go through your history especially about the feminist movement that you did after you came out from the jail, I am so inspired about this thing. And now I'm a part of the feminist movement. It's more feminist. It's all of us. They are young people or young women. And we are just trying to find like a way to political participation and civic participation in Sudan, because we have been not participate for a long time because we have dictatorship regime in Sudan. Because I'm part of this small women group called Khoshi Legna, or Access to Committee. And Khoshi Legna and Access to Committees really to encourage women to be part of the political parties, to be part of the Access Committee who's leading the struggle now in the street in Sudan. Because, you know, for the people who don't know Sudan, we have like revolution since 2019 until now. People go out to the street and protest and fighting to our rights and freedom from the military government. Because, yeah. And I'm so happy because I'm here. I want to just to know what Angela have like wisdom or something to me. You just take it with me to the Sudanese women and how you can support the women Sudanese movement. So that is all. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much. First of all, I want to say how happy I am to be here. It's been a huge motivation for me also becoming a historian, actually of Black history, of African American history, but also of feminist movement. And my question is really in terms of, also I wanted to ask the same question, but going in a different direction because I work in a university institution. And what does decolonize mean for us as young Black women when we're in these spaces? But also the question of mental health. How do we deal with mental health when we find ourselves in such spaces that, as I asked before, really do not want us in those spaces? So how do we go about it? And what advice can you give to the younger generation? Not only to keep the fire burning, but moments where we really say it's enough, we are tired, and what has happened until now. So for me, really the question of generational wealth, but also generational knowledge production in terms of how we as a people can continue with the struggle, but also what does it mean when we enter in spaces and say we want to decolonize them, especially the universities. Thank you.
I'm Sulti. I am a Kurdish refugee living here since 7 years. So for like my question is that how can we find a simple language within the movement that we can reach also the younger migrant people, because in my language or in many indigenous language, we are oppressed, there's oppression, but actually there is not such words in our languages to express ourselves. When we come here, we understand how we are colonized, how we are like under oppression, but in our language, somehow we don't have these words. And yes, because it's really important for us as the organizer of the new generation of refugees, not only BIPOCs from Ukraine, as we know right now there's also war in everywhere, like Palestine, Afghanistan, Kurdistan, everywhere. So we try to make a base for those that are coming here. But how can we find a more simple language to send this message or spread this message?
My name's Mirin Joki Mirie. I come from Cologne, and I am a Black. I migrated from Africa 22 years ago, and I fled from Africa looking for freedom as a lesbian woman. And I thought I would find the freedom here in Europe, but I got a surprise because I found myself in intersectionality. I found myself that I started facing a new problem of racism. I was marginalized by my own people, my own community. And I had many fights to fight as a black woman with the black people, as a lesbian woman, and then I find myself marginalized by the white people who are also fighting for their freedom to be recognized by their own communities. I know that in America, there is a similarity because I do follow that. What can you say, which fight, I normally ask myself, which fight is it that I should follow, which can liberate us, and all of us? And I also get disappointed because most of the people, most of our people as a black person don't see my fight and don't recognize that we also need to be liberated as well as them. And what is the greatest barrier for our fight in the intersectionality and as LGBT community? And how I would also like some words of wisdom. Yeah, with the experience, because yeah, words of wisdom. Okay. Thank you.
I am Captain. The discrimination as expected with these countries has been constant from the very start of the war, from who could board the trains to the border and who could board the trains and get across the border and who could get a meal. When you fight through all that, let's say, and you figure that you've gotten across the border and you're going to be safe and you're going to have a meal, you find Polish authorities or whichever country that you got to telling you that the hotels are reserved for Ukrainians and you're going to have to find your luck in a different city. And then you get to Germany and they create different laws for different refugees. The Ukrainians get immediate help with everything that they need, and the rest of us have to fight for every little thing. And it's still not enough. We still do not have the guaranteed right of stay. And all this made me realize that even though I've always known and stood for fighting, not just with the minority group that you belong in, and that it's important to be for the fight, for the oppressive majority, or those who are part of the majority, to fight just as much as the oppressed minority, you realize that you could not possibly understand, or you really couldn't know how, when you face discrimination undoubtedly in your daily life, but when you have to depend on every little thing from where you sleep or whether you cross a border on people who relentlessly insist on discriminating against you, you realize that regardless of how much you empathized or sympathized with refugees, you couldn't possibly understand what they're going through. And I say this as a Somali, the community that has been refugees for over 30 years. And I was born and raised in Nairobi, Kenya, a country that has the 4 largest refugee camps in the world, Dagahle, Kakuma, Ifo. And these refugees, hundreds of thousands of them, some who have been there for over 30 years, are not allowed to build permanent structures. They're not allowed to travel outside of their camp. They're not given any citizenship. And I realized, why have I never seen it before? It makes you think of what else is on your blind side. So I think, for a word of advice to all of us, look beyond the minority group that you belong in. Stand with the others, even when you're part of the majority. Do not be blindsided. Do not be blind to it. Do not just, have this narrow scope on just what affects you. And thank you for also doing the same with your fight, because I know you've been doing it with Palestine and you're not just focused on the issues in America. So thank you very much.
So, hello. I would love to say that I am just... This is me trying to be calm, but I got this opportunity today in the morning because I was supposed to work today, but I got time off to just come here, and it is a pleasure and an absolute pleasure for me to be here and to see... We are here because of women like you, people who have fought before and given us the strength to go on. And from that, I am a queer refugee. I am from Kenya. I have been living here for around 13 months now. And in this time, I have tried to do some activism with International Women's Space and a smaller group within it called Break Isolation Group. And I have gotten chances to also give speeches and express myself through and speak on behalf of queer refugees, African queer refugees. And it's been quite a struggle. And sometimes, just like Captain says, I might feel like I don't have the energy to help, rather to also fight in other aspects. I feel like I am sometimes too tired. So I would love to know, I have not been doing it for very long, maybe 3 years now, but I can also appreciate, because I had a talk with Mary who's been doing it for 22 freaking years. And I know that mentally, because I also feel it sometimes, mentally it has a toll on me. And physically, sometimes, emotionally, I am just too drained. How can we deal with activism exhaustion and activism, burnout and whatnot? So because I would love to keep this fight, but how then do we find a balance and the mental health and physical health and emotional health all together? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Barbara Sant. I am from the Magdalena International Network with a feminist theater of the oppressed in South America, Africa, and Europe. I'm so glad to be here, and I am Brazilian, and I am with this topic of right wings right now, because we are in the election. We have a chance to change the government of Bolsonaro, but we already have a really bad situation in the parliament. Parliament now is more than before right-wing, but really right-wing. It's like the radical ones, and the stupid ones, the ignorant ones, and that they don't believe in democracy. And so as an international women network, we are always asking ourselves, I'm really glad about that, how we can keep mental health, also take care of ourselves, because we also in our network, we have a lot of women that struggle for economic reasons or also for emotional reasons, and it's so difficult to keep in touch as how could we struggle together and see that we can also take care of ourselves, and not feel guilt to take care of ourselves. I think we are going to have a meeting in this November in Guinea-Bissau, and one of our topics is that how feminist network can take in serious the topic of taking care of ourselves. Thank you very much. I really love you and your history. Thank you. It's an inspiration.
Hello, my name is Mayra Rodriguez, and I am a writer and I am a daughter. I'm coming from Colombia in South America, and I have witnessed massive violent displacement of peoples, of my family, of loved ones. And I would love to learn about strategies for hope and strategies for resistance. And I'm also very grateful to be in this room today. So thank you.
I am from a counseling center. It's called Reach Out. We counsel people who are victims of racist attacks. So the question I have, we also have a project who take care of these people psychologically, because most of them are extremely traumatized. So my question is, in Germany, it's happening again and again when a refugee or migrant person is unstable, psychologically, mentally unstable. People call, the social workers call police. And what do police do? They kill them, mostly. So what do you do in your sphere of the world? What answers you have for that? Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I think it will be such a traumatizing experience for me if I don't say what is in my heart before we leave. Because for me, this is, as most of us have said, it's one of the greatest moments of my life. I'm so humbled, yeah? My name is Lucy. I come from Kenya as well. And I'm from International Women's Space. And also I coordinate the activities of the Break Isolation Group, which is a refugee women only self-organized group within International Women's Space. And for me, having you here today, Angela, I don't know, I don't have the right words. But of course, one thing I want to say is I'm so inspired. reading about your journey, political activism journey, for me, it's so amazing. And most importantly, that you are here today, that I can hear from you, not reading about you, but hearing from your mouth. As I would say, not so old activist, I would say, I am inspired, and I'm looking forward to hear more from you, because this is exactly what all of us look for. I mean, we are all trying to, like many of us have said, the journey of activism, sometimes it's so draining. Sometimes you feel like you want to give up. But then at some point you are telling yourself, no, it's not about me only, but it's about the millions of other people, other women all over the world going through similar struggles. So that is the energy that keeps us going. But then, for you as Angela, we would love to hear more. Thank you so much, and we love you, and we love you more. And how I wish that we would have you for more days here. Yes? But we are so grateful and humbled that you came. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Savannah Sipo. I'm really nervous. And also wanted to thank you for being here. A few of my questions have already been asked, but I still wanted to add on in the sense of finding balance and the tiredness. So first of all, I'm also working at Reach Out with Sanchita, and I'm a spoken word poetess. And I do study area studies Africa, Asia, so I'm also in that history field. And I also experience the fatigue and the tiredness of being in activism and also trying to figure out how to find a balance. And I've tried to go to healing circles and different empowering events, but I also found that they don't last long, because also the people organizing them and the whole group, at some point they might get re-traumatized or tired again. So I was wondering if you maybe have ideas for strategies, how one can actually create long-term healing circles and spaces, especially for women of color, to empower and rest each other, and to get rest. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jackie. I'm from International Women's Space, and I'm also part of the Break Isolation group in the queer project that we recently started with Anne here. My question is, like, most of the time during your fight, when you're, how do you deal with when you feel like the community you're fighting for doesn't seem to appreciate or recognize what you're doing? How do you deal with that? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Yasmin. I am Palestinian. And we are here, a group of 4 of us, and we just arrived. As most of you here know, the Bundestag, the German Bundestag, introduced in May 2019 a resolution that equates between anti-Semitism and BDS. So while political activism for Palestine was never welcomed really in Germany, the resolution has introduced a new era of political persecution and legal tools and terminology into what is supposed to be a free and open democratic space to bring in our cause and mobilize for it. Now the Palestinian community in Germany lives in intimidation to speak up and rally for their identity and cause, and the same for activists. So we are facing, as activists, a decline in the places where we can actually be present. We are facing racism in leftist circles that want to remove the Palestinian cause from the scene, or want us to abide to a certain discourse if we are allowed to speak. Activists among us fear for their workplaces if they express their solidarity with the Palestinian cause. Some of them, if you have heard from the Deutsche Welle, for instance, journalists were kicked out from their jobs, 7 of them, after they digged into their history, into what they have written in Twitter or social media on Palestine. Activists are being harassed on social media and persecuted legally, and we are being accused of anti-Semitism for the support of the freedom of the Palestinian people. And finally, in May this year, we planned, as activists, a group called Palestine Speaks, we planned 3 days of activities to commemorate the Nakba here in Berlin. And after we had received all the confirmations in advance, a month before that, the police, 3 days before the actual activities happened, banned our activities and our demonstration in an unprecedented escalation against peaceful demonstrations. And the justification, they sent us 15-page, later on maybe, if there is a discussion and there is time for it, I can go into details. It raises this justification by the police department that actually the crowd that attends our demonstrations, which are some Arabs and Muslims, are prone to violence. And that was the justification of the police. Thank you.
I will translate for Zainab. She is from Kurdistan. سلام عرض میکنم. من به عنوان یک فعال زن کرد I want to talk about the situation of the woman prisoner. I don't need to say what's happening right now in Iran. Everyone know about it. I want just to mention under which condition the woman prisoner should be in Iran, which is an absolutely brutal situation. 1980, two women, Nasrin and Shahla Kabi, were executed because they were fighting for justice and democracy. After it, we had also many cases as Shirin Alamhoui, who was also executed, and now the only woman prisoner in the Iranian prison who has a lifetime prison is Zainab, who is is Zainab Jalalian, who has a lifetime prison sentence. And unfortunately, it's not, I mean, the people are not really speaking about her situation. I want also to mention that the other nations and ethnicities and the people who are talking the other language in Iran are also extra oppressed, and especially the women in Balochistan, the Arabs women, and the Kurdish women. What I want to tell you is, not just in Iran, in whole of these areas, we have we have 10,000 political prisoners just in Turkey. That is why we need more solidarity in this case. And I want also to say that this slogan, Jinjian Azadi, woman, life, freedom, doesn't belong just to Kurdish women or Iranian women. That's the slogans that belongs to all women and other genders around the world.
I'm going to pick up on the issue of Kurdish women, but also connected in general to struggles of women all over the world. As my sister just mentioned, it's actually about Jinjian Azadi. That's more, it's not just a slogan for protest, it's actually people calling for a perspective, people seeing that we do not want to live under patriarchal state mentality anymore. So the question now is, we do see like arising all of these different struggles all over. How can we have like a roof kind of all of these organizing women in the streets, right? Like how can we actually see at our ideologies, how can we overcome maybe differences that we have ideologically, and how can we make a universal movement out of this local movement that we do see at this point. So the question that we as a Kurdish women movement, together with sisters from all over the world, are actually asking is, we do need to come together. We do need to come together also in a way of understanding there are going to be future attacks on our bodies, on our minds, on our freedoms, and we need to share the struggles that we have, but we also really have to collectively understand that we do have to come together at this point and really look at the questions that are maybe also obstacles at this point of why we have so many different struggles that are trying to get together, but it's just really hard under the current conditions. So really, like last words, really making a universal movement out of the local context that we're in at this point. Thank you.
I'm from Sudan and Darfur, and I would like just to ask, like, for me, I think what it felt at the moment, it's like the contribution, or at least the perspective of the women who are not traditionally from the elite, powerful, cultural, whatever, in the global, in general, in the global context, but also especially from our country in Sudan. I had encountered a lot of talks with a lot of communities also from Morocco, from like the Amazigh groups and women farmers who work in the argan industry. And I think that's my question: how could we do this? Because without that, for sure, we cannot go further. I mean, we just go back again and again to this like reactions mode, and I don't think that get us anywhere. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Revolutionary Association of the Women of Afghanistan, RAVA, I would like to express my warmest welcome to Professor Angela Davis and the dear audience. I'm grateful that we can speak here today. We are all aware that last year, after 20 years of military occupations, wars and crime, the US imperialism surrendered Afghanistan to its Taliban mercenaries again. This caused our people to sink more and more into the abyss of poverty, unemployment, immigration, and misogyny. On the first days of seizing power, the Taliban deprived the women of the right to education, work, and freedom. The Ministry of the Propagation and Virtue of the Prevention of Vice, or in other words, the religious police of the Taliban, ordered that women should not leave the house. Women are still humiliated, beaten, and killed in public. A year on, Afghanistan remains the only country worldwide that has tragically denying women an education. Immediately after they were brought back to power, the Taliban forbade every kind of personal freedom. Contrary to their claims, the security situation has only deteriorated, and dozens of our compatriots are killed today in explosions and suicide attacks. However, on the other hand, we are witnessing the resistance and protests of women in Afghanistan. Since the first day of the Taliban takeover, these women protest on the streets without any fear of guns or whiplashes and bravely continue their fight. As a recent example, last week, hundreds of Afghan women demonstrated after the suicide bombing that targeted mostly young women from the Hazara community while being at the university, or the protest in front of the Iranian consulate as a sign of support. Afghan women are bold and loud. They are courageous, and the Taliban can't silence them. Inside Afghanistan, RAVA is in the front line of these battles alongside the Afghan people since 1977. RAVA has always pointed out that women's rights and freedom have been bogus claims by the US invaders. But we as a nation have no other choice but to unite and fight independently against every kind of fundamentalism and its foreign masters by mobilizing the people, especially women. We declare our support for the struggles of brave sisters of Iran, Kurdistan, Palestine, Turkey, India, Latin America, and all the women's liberations movement in the world. And we ask you, progressive and revolutionary organizations, to stand by the people of Afghanistan and protect Afghan women. We need your solidarity and support in our fight for freedom, democracy based on secularism, and social justice. Raise your voice for those who are not allowed to go to school today. Please support us. Thank you.
I am Shadi Abdelmunim from Sudan. And I think we have to change our strategy as women, as feminist movement, to change the situations worldly. Because now in Sudan, the revolution was led by women in Sudan, and by the end of the day, we end up with nothing regarding justice. And also there is a military coup, which is supported by the international community, by the Arab region countries, and they enforce Sudanese to adopt the international project for Sudan, which we don't want it in Sudan. We are in a revolution for years, and I think the international policy is made by the big powers, so that how we are as women feminists can change this situation.
Thank you. Dear Angela, this is also the second time we met. The first time was in Colombia. I was that time in the university with Seuna, with this Black Afro-American collective. This is a pleasure to meet you today again. So as you know, Latin America, and in particular Colombia, is living a new political era. So the first time we had a progressive government, and the first time we had a black vice president. So this is an amazing, huge political change, not only in my country, but also I think that had a meaning for the whole world. But it also means many changes and challenges for us, because now we are in the institutional area. So the state and the government was always our enemy, and now we are in the government. We are the government, and there are a lot of contradictions there. And my question was, because now U.S. government tried to come or that to work closer to us, and for me it's really shock to see Francia Marquez take pictures with the representative from the USA government. But I know how real politics works, but it's really hard for me as Black activist, and also to support this kind of, for example, USAID. That is an imperialist institution who always was behind the cop-up in Latin America. So the concrete question is, how far we should trust the government, or the power of the government, or the possibilities to change, or to make a real change in this governmental institutional position, and how far we as Colombians should trust U.S. government now.
Well, thank you all so much. I feel really privileged to have been able to spend this time with you and to hear your stories. And I'm so sorry we don't have many, many, many more hours to spend together. And my dilemma now is that I would like to respond to, all of the statements and questions. And if you look at all of the notes that I wrote, for those of you who have written statements, and then perhaps for those of you who didn't have written statements, maybe you can write a short statement and we can share the statements, not only with me, but with everyone present today. Does that sound like a good approach? Because every single intervention was important. And I feel as if I can't really choose which ones to respond to. And besides, any response that I might give today could never address the enormity of the situations that have been discussed this afternoon. But first of all, let me thank all of you who have mentioned my own struggles. And I just want to say that, I'm no special person. I'm not, I'm no hero. And if I'm important, it's only because people came to my aid. When I was in jail, when I was facing the death penalty. And I always have to point out that it's never about me as an individual. It's always about collective struggles and the fact that my life was saved by people all over the world and from all of the countries addressed here today, by people who came together and said no and managed to defeat the strategies of the most powerful country and the most powerful white men in the world. And I think it's my responsibility to make that point and to act as a witness for possibilities that were generated from masses of people everywhere, because we still need that kind of power today. We need that kind of collective power more than ever before, and especially to address the issues that were raised about Palestine and the Kurdish struggle and the Iranian struggle and the Sudanese struggle and the struggles of refugees and migrants in Europe, all over the world really, but especially now here in Germany. So I think I'm just gonna see where my eyes land on the paper. I know that a number of you address issues of trauma and mental health and how to keep struggling, how to maintain resistance when oftentimes we feel so defeated as individuals. We feel so exhausted that we don't really know where to look for strength to continue. And I could say that, yeah, we have a right to feel exhausted because, you know, I was talking about this song in the press conference that happened before this, Freedom is a Constant Struggle. And, you know, the verses to that song are, you know, I've moaned so long. We've moaned so long, we must be free. You know, we've struggled so long, we must be free. We've died so long, we must be free. And yet we are not. I can share with you my own experience because I've been involved in the struggle since, you know, I might say since I was 6 or 7, but at least since I consciously decided to do something in Birmingham, Alabama, that was illegal against the racist local regime there. And I was 11 years old then. And now at this age, and I said at the press conference that it's less than a year and a half before I will turn 80. And I can hardly believe that I've been on this earth that long, but also been involved in the struggle almost that long. So I guess I can say that over the years I've learned that we can never take on these issues as individuals because we will be crushed if we only think of ourselves as individuals. The struggle always has to be about building community, creating collectives, and envisioning our own work as a contribution to those collectives, to those communities. And if we truly imagine ourselves not as individuals, but as part of larger communities, then we recognize that sometimes we have to rest. But oftentimes the reason why we don't take time to rest is because we think that we matter so much that when we stop, everything stops. And we have to stop thinking in those individualistic terms. Because if we don't, we're only killing ourselves. And so, yes, we have to rest. We have to take time out. And we know that our sister comrades will continue doing the work. So therefore, we don't have to feel guilty about taking care of ourselves. And self-care has to be a collective phenomenon. You know, it can't be that as individuals we need to take care of ourselves so that we can continue as individuals. It's about guaranteeing that the collective has a future. And so we owe it to our communities to sometimes tell our sister, brother, sibling, comrades, that, you need to take some time off. Because it's counterproductive for you to try to work under these conditions of exhaustion and trauma and oftentimes emotional and mental instability. And I know there was a question about that. I can't remember who asked. Right, a number of you did, actually. And so this is one of the reasons why we have to embrace, I think, an abolitionist perspectives. Because the tendency when people have episodes, as someone was pointing out, is to call the police. And then what happens is that person often ends up dead. And I mean, I say this as someone who's been involved in abolitionist struggles for now virtually all of my life, since at least the 70s, since the period when I was in jail. And so when we say we want to abolish these institutions like prisons and the police, it is in order to find new ways of addressing issues that cannot be addressed by those repressive institutions. And so, you know, why are police sent to deal with someone who's deeply traumatized? It makes no sense at all, because they're trained to use guns. They're trained in violence, and they're going to use their training to address these issues. And more often than not, the consequence is tragic. Thank you so much for raising the question not only of justice for Palestine, but raising the question of the repression that exists in this country when people try to make visible the need to garner support for the human rights of Palestinian people. And I plan to speak about this during my presentation later, but it seems as if Germany has decided that it wants to deal with its historical guilt by displacing it on the Palestinian people. And this is a struggle that all of us need to embrace. In the US, in the Black struggle, we talk about the importance of emphasizing the affinities between the struggle for justice for Palestine and the struggle for Black liberation or Black freedom. It's one of those international struggles that will assist all of us to move forward. And so, you know, thank you so much for raising the question of the false accusations of anti-Semitism that are directed at those who are critical of the state of Israel. You know, since when are we not supposed to be able to criticize a government? I mean, we criticize governments all over the world. We're all involved in some effort to challenge governments. Why should Israel be the sole exception? But thank you so much for raising those issues. And then, of course, Kurdish women who have been showing us the way for a very long time, and who have allowed the world to understand that there can be no liberation of human beings without liberating women. And I think we all benefit from the leadership that Kurdish women have been exercising, and we must recognize and be involved in that struggle. Colombia. Several of you talked about Colombia, and I should tell you that I met Francia Marquez, who is the current vice president, when she was a very, very young activist. And I was invited to go to Colombia in 2011, 2010 or 2011, to offer support to Francia's community in Las Tomas, near Cali in Colombia. And it has been really inspiring witnessing the way she has not only advocated against the eviction of her community, but that she has become a spokeswoman, a spokesperson for all oppressed people in Colombia. The last question about what governments are capable of doing. And I think all of us know that that change happens not so much because of what governments do, but because of what organized masses of people accomplish. And this is the case whether the government is repressive or whether the government is progressive. And I think that it's up to all of us to lend support to grassroots movements in Colombia, and those who are fighting on behalf of Black people in Colombia, those who are fighting on behalf of indigenous people in Colombia, those who want a truly democratic future for Colombia. And for those in government, this gives them the capacity to use their positionality to bring about the changes that they can. But I still, whether it's in Brazil, and thank you very much for talking about the situation in Brazil, where we were certain that Bolsonaro was not going to win nearly as many votes as he did. But at the same time, we have to be happy that more women and more Black women have been, and Black trans women have been elected to office. I think that we have to figure out how to claim our victories when we can. Even though those victories may not be the ultimate victories we're hoping for. Because if we struggle so long without any victories at all, it's an indication that what we are doing has not had an impact on the world. And our work does have an impact. It does bring about change. Maybe not the change we think we want, but it does change the very terrain on which we struggle. So let's learn how to claim those victories. The situation in Iran, for those of us who have been involved in generating solidarity for Iran, have been very excited about the fact that this seems to be the very first time, since the revolution, that there seems to be a real possibility for moving forward. And thank you so much for, mentioning the massacres of 1988. There have been so many examples of repression internationally that have been covered by the media, that people are aware of, but outside of the families of those who were killed in Iran and progressive people, that massacre was not known until very recently. And I know that there's a book written by Nasser, what is his last name? Mohaji, yeah. And I had the opportunity to meet with him in Oakland, California. And I actually wrote a short foreword to that book, and was glad to be able to learn firsthand, to read the testimonies by the families of those whose loved ones were subject to that terrible repression. And thank you so much, the Somalian woman from the Ukraine. Thank you very much for your testimony. And we know, as I said at the press conference, that racism is global. It's not just located in a couple places in the world. It infects the entire globe. And your question about how to create long-term healing circles, I think we have to keep reminding ourselves that our responsibilities to the struggle involve, assisting those who need our help. And sometimes it happens in formal circles, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's just about recognizing that, my sister comrade really needs some help. Let me be there for her. And to developing that sense of responsibility, not only to the larger cause, but to those who will make it possible for us to begin to approach that victory. And, there's so much more, but I think what I'm going to do is also thank you so much for pointing out the centrality of the struggles of women in Afghanistan. And being from the US, I feel we have a special responsibility because we did not stop that war. We should have. And we know that the Taliban is a creation of the US government. And that this, denial of rights and education to women, we all knew that that would happen. And when we think about the fact that US presidents from Bush on have attempted to justify a military presence in Afghanistan by talking about the importance of saving Afghan women, they were not interested in Afghan women. That was a pretext. And so we need international solidarity. We need to develop the kind of movement that will really force a change in Afghanistan. Did I miss Ukraine? Yeah, the racism related to those who get to receive the benefits of struggles conducted by refugee movements. But of course, if one is white, then those, I mean, that's, as I said before, that's racism. The importance of centering queer issues among the agenda that is that has been developed for refugees. Thank you so much for raising this. It is not a minor question, and I think we are beginning to recognize that issues and communities that have been, and I don't want to use the term that are minorities, because I think that that term militates against the people who are considered minorities are actually in the majority in the world, right? So I like to use it as a verb, that we are minoritized. Whether we're talking about people of color, whether we're talking about queer and trans people, it's a process of relegating these communities to the margins. Okay, I think there's maybe one more issue, and that is violence. And the fact that oftentimes when we think about making change and we fight so long and we see no change, we then think that, you were raising that, that we have to figure out another way. And as someone who has been involved for a very long time with organizations like the Black Panther Party and who used weapons for self-defense, I think I want to emphasize that that our primary responsibility is bringing people together. And sometimes we think violence will do that. But in my experience, it's often a shortcut. The organizing that we do to bring people together is hard. It takes a long time. We don't get to see the results so quickly. And oftentimes, the results take generations. And I'm someone who can say that when we looked at those mobilizations that happened in the summer of 2020, in the aftermath of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor's killings, it was clear that those mobilizations represented generations of organizing. And sometimes it takes that long. And there are no shortcuts. We have to do the work. And then oftentimes it's passing the work down to the next generation. It's creating the terrain so that the next generation can go further, so that the next generation can stand on our shoulders and reach a little higher. And I think that's the primary work we do. Now, if we are attacked, we defend ourselves. And I think that is where the question of violence might come in. But let's try not to use violence as a shortcut because we think that it might make us feel better at the moment. And that's failing to recognize that the work we are doing is for the future, and that we won't all necessarily be around to experience the consequences of that work. But the fact that we won't be around doesn't mean that it's not important, unless we use capitalist notions of you know, time being measured by an individual's lifetime. And I like to think about indigenous cosmologies that require us to ask, what will be the consequence of what I do now 7 generations from now? And in that way, we create a way to be spiritually present, even if we're no longer here physically. And as you see, I can talk. So, because I do have to give a talk this afternoon, I think I should probably stop. And I want to thank all of you for your contributions.
Thank you very much for what you already said, but if you could just send a message
to Brazil
in this time of like until the next round of the elections.
People around the world are closely watching the elections in Brazil. We certainly hope that the Brazilian people will evict fascism by voting against Bolsonaro and voting for Lula. Brazil is really the hope of the Americas. And what happens during the next period in Brazil will have an impact not only on countries all over South America and the Caribbean, but also in North America as well. So we are sincerely hoping that when people will go out and vote for Lula, and vote for socialism, and vote for liberation.
And